Hi everyone, welcome to Cloud Rangers Microsoft Azure training. As you know, I'm Sean Ismail, a Microsoft Azure MVP, and that's my contact information below there, my email, Twitter, blog, LinkedIn, YouTube, where you're most likely viewing this right now, and the slides at slideshare.net where I'm going to post the slides when we are done with this session. So today we are going to talk about Azure SQL Database, and this is the part one introduction. And there's a lot of theory concepts in this session, unfortunately, because we have to go through all the concepts before we can get to the demo or get to all the offerings that Microsoft SQL Azure has to provide. And in this session, we are going to have a demo to how to create a SQL database, however, at the end. Okay, but let's get through some not really complicated, but some complex concepts that we have with SQL Azure and Azure SQL. And what I'm going to do is I'm trying to make this as simple as possible, even the hard topic. So I'm hoping that I did the background work to make this as simple for you. Okay, so let's get started. So Azure provides a range of services when it comes to managing data. And technically in the curriculum, you'll notice SQL databases fall under Azure storage because it is some sort of storage, right? You are storing data. And so far in storage, we have done the blob storage. We did some, queue. We actually even did table, and which was interesting. There was no schema there, and we did some others like that. But this one is more about the SQL database, or what we call the relational database. So most businesses rely on some sort of relational databases these days. Let that be Microsoft SQL, MySQL, or Oracle, or whatever. These are all relational databases. Means there is a collection of two-dimensional tables where you will hear about rows and columns. And what's happening here is that in Microsoft Azure SQL Database, we have a relational database management as a service offering here. Okay, so this is actually a database as a service. You can actually call that. And it is based on Microsoft SQL Server engine. So this service is not based on MySQL or Oracle or anybody else, which is not a really big surprise given that, this is a Microsoft offering. It's Microsoft Cloud offering. Okay, so we need to do two things here. So Microsoft Azure provides two basic types of relational database services. Now that when I'm looking at this slide, I'm thinking maybe I should put the second one in the first one and first one in the second one for the sake of simplicity. But let's start with the second one, infrastructure as a service. There are really two, platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. Let's start with infrastructure as a service, okay? So this is what we know. Let's say you're trying to create a SQL server on a physical server or Hyper-V or VMware virtual machine or in Azure, an infrastructure as a service VM. This is what we know. We create a VM, we join it to the domain, and we go install Microsoft SQL Server. We go and we need all the regular management tasks. We need to make sure the server is patched, server is updated. We need to maintain all of that. We need to make sure the hardware does not fail. It's well maintained. We need to also make sure there's business continuity, like things like backups, things like DR scenarios that we have to account for, and it's license based. So you license SQL servers per core, I believe now in SQL 2012, 2014, and now come 2016. So that's infrastructure as a service option. But what we are trying to say is that forget all of that. We are going to go platform as a service. Here, the database is as a service. It eliminates the requirements to manage the underlying operating system and the database server platform. What it means is that you do not have to create a server, you do not have to install SQL. All you have to do is just go create the database. Like it's as simple as possible. And it frees all the admin tasks from all the server management things like update, patching. You don't have to worry about all that. You don't have to worry about the underlying hardware. You have to worry about NoSQL installation updates. It will do that for you. And guess what? It also has built-in backup and business continuity services. So it will do the backups for you based on how you configure it. It will also have the DR set up, which is quite hard to do on premises. If you guys actually have done a DR scenario, disaster recovery scenario for your on-premise solution, it wasn't easy. You have to get a different location, different data center. You have to create like some sort of VPN tunnel between them. You have to do SQL always on or data mirroring. It's quite complicated, but SQL database from Azure as a service comes with all of that in there. And it's built hourly. Means if you are using a database today, you don't use it tomorrow, you don't pay for it. You can have as many databases created as you need, and all will be paid hourly. So obviously there is like a lot of benefit going to platform as a service, and that's what today's session is all about. Okay. Okay, so we are going to talk about service tiers, and this is one of the most important topics to understand and a bit complex as well when it comes to Azure SQL Database. Okay, so multiple service tiers are offered by Azure SQL to handle different workloads. And the service tiers basically determine what are the capabilities or performance and price of hosting or getting the database as a service. Okay, so in on-premise environment or even Azure Infrastructure as a Service VMs, you can install SQL. And when you install SQL, there are a couple of things you take care of. You make sure you are putting in the right CPU, you're putting in the right memory, you're putting in the right disks, like regular disk or solid state disks. And what your database administrator will tell you, or if you are a database administrator, you think is that I want the maximum performance of SQL I can get out of this, right? And it has a lot of application dependency. Like your application might be something as simple as a telephone book where people are just going and looking up people's numbers or addresses or whatever. Or it can be a mission critical application where people are making hundreds of queries per second to get some sort of information like a stock exchange or whatever. Okay, so your application will determine the kind of hardware or resources you need for your database. With on-premises, there are a lot of ways to do that, and definitely I'm not an expert to explain that, but there are a lot of ways to, you know, benchmark what kind of SQL environment you need. In Azure SQL, obviously, since you are not creating the virtual machines yourself, it's a little hard to determine that. And that's why Azure created different service tiers to sort of gauge what kind of performance you want per database basis or in a pool. So one thing I want to let you know is that since this is the cloud, what happens is that you can have a database created and you can put a service tier on it, and you can change that service tier at any given time. If you find out that today you have 50 people making queries to the database and a month later it's becoming 500, you can change the service tier to something else than what you started off with. And there's a minimal downtime, like we are talking about almost nothing, less than 4 seconds or something like that. Okay, so there are three service tiers out of the box. One is basic, one is a standard, and one is premium. So these are the service tiers. And these service tiers can have multiple performance levels. And what it means by is that if you look at this table, there's a basic, and that's the service tier, and that's the performance level. But the next tier, which is the standard tier, it has four performance level, S0 to S3, right? And with premium, you have multiple as well. So each service tier can have multiple performance level. And we almost call it as like the power to your database, like what kind of power your database needs. Okay. Now, before I get into what kind of power your database needs and what this power is denoted by, I want to talk about how the service tiers are applied. Your service tiers are applied at two levels. One is a single database level, and one is at a multiple databases level. So with single database, each database can have its own tier and its own limit. So what will happen is that you create just one database. Let's say my database one. That's the name of your database. You say that this database will require a certain amount of resources, and I'm going to assign basic tier to it. And the next database you create, you make it like standard database because you need more resources, and you say it's going to be standard S3 based on some resources, the amount of resources it needs. Okay, so this is almost like each database will function independently of other databases. So if you have one database which is like basic, the other can be standard, another can be premium, another can be standard S2. So all these databases will have their different tiers, like they're independent of each other and they're running on their own servers. In reality, they're probably not running on their own servers, but the resources, the way it will be assigned to them and how isolated they will be, it will feel like they're all running on own servers with different resources on that server. Okay, This kind of single database is good for when you have some consistent type of load. Like you have a database which you know is going to run not all the time or maybe all the time. So there's some predictability. Like if you know it's if let's say it's a business address book or it's an HR directory, you know that people are going to query every now and then. Versus let's say it's a stock exchange with some stock ticker info in a database, you know that people are going to be on there all the time, hundreds or thousands of transactions per second. So these are for databases where you understand how the usage pattern is going to be. Okay. Then you have multiple databases. Multiple databases is pretty simple as well. It's basically you are taking a bunch of single databases, you're putting them in a pool. Let's say it's a container, and on the container you put the tier. Like it's going to be basic, standard, and premium. So what this will do is it's basically just going to share all these resources, okay? And I'll get to that in the next slide, what we mean by sharing all these resources, because in Azure SQL Database, this is probably one of the most complex concept what we are talking about right now. Not the single database or the multiple databases, but how the resources are assigned to it. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about this table over here. So I have mentioned already there are three tiers: basic, standard, and premium. And some of the tiers have different performance levels. And what we are talking about over here is basically the power that is given to the databases. The most important number over here is the DTUs, and the next slide will explain what DTUs are. But basically, it's the unit of power you're giving to these databases. And it has other requirements of resources as well. Like in a basic tier, your maximum database size is not going to be more than 2 gigs. You are not going to have more than 300 concurrent sessions. So depending on this table, you have a basic idea of how much resources you need to put on your database. Should that be a basic tier or a standard or a premium? Should that be a standard S1 or S3 or maybe a premium with P1 performance level? So you have to determine that. And the way you determine that is based on the DTUs. And I'll tell you in a bit once again what DTUs are, because that's probably the most complex concept you are going to take from this session, and understanding that is very important, not only for your exams, your real life. I mean, I by no means I'm like a SQL expert, but I'll try to make this as simple as possible for you. You're going to have that happy feeling by the time you're done with the DTUs over here. But basically, you say, I'm going to create one database, which will need about, let's say, 30 DTUs. So you look over here and say that, oh, okay, if I need 30, it's between 20 and 50. So maybe I'll need a S2 database for my single database. With multiple databases, what you'll do is, let's say you have three databases you created. You take all three and you put them in a container. And you say, these databases are going to share resources, but they're, let's say, never going to go more than 100. So you are going to put a standard S3 100 on the database pool. All the databases are going to share that 100. Okay. And as long as, let's say, you have three databases and none of them go more than 100 at any given time, you'll be fine. And I'll show you the calculation in a bit. Okay, so let's leave it at this right now and move to the next slide. In the next slide, we are going to talk about the DTUs, the database transaction unit. So what is database transaction unit? So far, I have used the word power a few times and performance tiers many times actually. So the three service tiers that we talked about have multiple performance levels, like we said, right? The resources kept increasing as we looked at the table. Each performance level provides an increasing set of resources or power to the databases, and it in turn delivers increasing throughput. So what we mean is that as we increase the power or increase the tiers and the performance levels, you are going to get more out of these databases, like the throughput, which is basically transaction per unit of time. Let that be transaction per seconds or minutes, whatever. But what we are interested in is really transactions per second. So this power is technically what DTU or database transaction unit is. And it's just a unit that Microsoft created to simplify how Azure SQL Database power will be calculated. And in general, what we say is that increase of power is basically increased database performance. And power of each service tier and performance level will be expressed in DTU. So I have a document over here which kind of well, that link which kind of says how the DTU was determined or how did Microsoft come up with this unit. Technically, it's a benchmark, means Microsoft did some tests and came up with that number, and it said that what this each number meant. So for choosing the amount of resources you need for your database, you will have to go through this DTU and find out how many DTUs your database will need. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the benchmark. This is a little bit off topic on how did they do it, but I think it's interesting. So like I mentioned, DTU is like a benchmark, okay? To develop this, what Microsoft did was it took a set of operations, like typical for OLTP requests, like, select queries, insert queries, and made it the minimum or made it as atomic as possible. And what it did was it ran these queries at any given time, and it saw how, it measured how many transactions could be done at this tier level or its different performance level in a in each performance level in a fully loaded condition. So let me go back to this table and show you. So let's say Microsoft took a bunch of transactions and they gave them similar, it gave them a similar environment, and it said that, okay, this is the basic tier. I'm going to run this operations right now and see how many of these operations can be done in in a second, given the conditions I have. So these conditions are really not public, means they have not said that how much of resources were given. But what they found out is that given those conditions, in a second, in a basic tier, you could get up to 5 DTUs or database transaction units or 5 DTUs over there. In similar condition, if you go and try to, and Microsoft went and put these resources in there as well for those. I guess those could be changed, but they just put that over there. So then they went and changed the scenario and put more resources or whatever in there, and it went and saw that in S0 performance level, which is a standard tier performance level, they found about 10 transactions they could do per second, given those 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 resources that they provided there. And these were typical, right? I mean, these were typical transactions like select, insert, or whatever, and they did that. And they went and measured these performance levels in there. The way I look at it, I still look at DTUs as transactions per second. It's probably the closest you can come to clarifying or understanding what it means. It's definitely a little bit more complex than that. But what I feel is that if you have an application which requires about 100 transaction per second, maybe you need to look at the DTU with 100, which will be a standard S3 performance level. That's at least the most simplest way I can think of. Now, that's not even the complex one. The complex thing is that, okay, let's say you have an on-premise database. You will wonder that, okay, how will I determine my on-premise database running today in that environment? I'm going to migrate it to Azure, and I don't want a VM. I want the super awesome Azure SQL database. How will I find out what DTU is required? Because transaction per second is not really the easiest and the most simplest thing to determine, right? So the good part was that Microsoft created something called as Azure SQL Database DTU Calculator, and this is the link that is there. It's a very nice tool where you take this bunch of PowerShell script and you run it on your on-premise environment, or even it could be on your Azure VM, and you calculate based on the performance it collects from your environment or that server. It will be able to tell you that, hey, this is the amount of DTU you typically need for running this database. I think that's one of the best things Microsoft came up with for helping out with this DTU scenario. But if you don't have a database where you can run this tool and get that, then you might have to try and dial up and down a little bit to calculate how much DTU you can get. And in the portal, you will see when you run this database, Microsoft actually gives you an advisory telling you, hey, looks like you set this on a 20 DTU, but your application requires a little bit more significantly at given times of the day because the usage goes up and down. For example, if it's a stock exchange, most likely you have the most amount of queries done for the tickers in the daytime than in the nighttime, because most people are probably checking this during the daytime. So what it will do is it will be able to tell you that, hey, this is the maximum DTU it's requiring, so you might want to dial this up a little bit or quite a bit depending on that. So once again, I want you to think of DTU as, transaction per second. That's probably not the best. Um, I mean, it's definitely not the best explanation, but it's the closest you're going to come to, depending on how Microsoft did the benchmark and everything else. So this article from Microsoft in Azure documentation, SQL Database Benchmark Overview, actually tells you how they went and performed it. And basically it was a bunch of queries given at a certain time to certain set of resources, which determined those numbers. Okay, I hope that helps you understand this a little bit. Now, that was for single databases, by the way. So this database transaction unit was all for single database. However, when we are talking about the database pools, things are a little different. And in the database pool, rather than DTUs, we use eDTUs, okay, or elastic DTUs. This is a little bit of this is definitely complex, but I'm going to give it a shot, and we are going to get through this together, okay? eDTUs are exactly like DTUs, but you are actually taking these DTUs and putting it in a pool of databases, okay? So, like I mentioned, elastic databases or elastic, database units, the way this works is that you have one database and you say, okay, I understand, or this database is very predictable. Like I gave this example a couple of slides ago. This is a, address book. It's slow. It's not going to be queried all the time. I'm going to just give it a basic tier maximum, 5 DTUs. The database size is never going to be more than 2 gigs. I'm good to go. Or you might come and say, it's a very busy database, but it's still predictable. Like I know that, let's say the stock ticker for a stock exchange, a lot of queries in the daytime, hundreds of transactions per second. I'm going to give it a high DTU, like maybe a premium tier, and let it have all its DTUs. It's still predictable. But this is where the problem is. That stock database, a stock exchange database, is probably not going to be as busy in the nighttime. So you give it a premium DTU or premium tier, but you are saying that, you know, I'm only really looking at, like, let's say 1000 DTUs in the morning because 1000 transactions will happen per second, but rest of the night, maybe it goes down to 100. So there is no way for you to do auto scaling on this one. Yeah, at night you could go and change the tier. Like in this slide, we said that service tiers can be changed anytime. So at night you might say, all right, I'm going to take this down from a premium to a standard, S3 performance level. So this is a single database. You're tuning it as you want. This is not necessarily the best scenario all the time, and you want to have a little bit of flexibility. You want to put, multiple things together and work out something, and that's where the multiple databases or elastic databases came into picture. And the way this works is that how you have virtual machines on your on-premise environments. You remember the whole idea about having virtual machines on VMware or Hyper-V was what? Was that, hey, all these VMs are going to be using the same physical server, but we are going to count on the fact that all of them are not going to be busy and requiring all resources all the time. So you're going to share all these resources between these all VMs. The concept is similar with elastic database pools as well. You say, okay, I have a contact book address list database, I have a stock exchange database, I have 3 and 4 other databases. Okay? And these databases are not all busy all the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a container, or this is called the database pool, and I'm going to assign still a basic, standard, or premium tier to it. And which makes sense. It's not like you can have a database that's going to go all the way from 0 to 1000 at any given time. They still have the restrictions of a single database based on the tier you put on them, like the basic, premium, whatever, but they're not going to do this all the time. Okay, so for an example, let's look at the next slide here. I'll come back to the slide over here. We have one database here that is, and this is the DTU utilization based on time. So the way this is working is that from 12 o'clock to 12:05, you can see it went up to 50 DTUs. And then 12:10, it went to 90 DTUs. And rest of the time, it never really crossed 50. The average, by looking at this graph over here, I can say the average was, like less than 10 DTUs. It goes up to 10, 90, but rest of the time, really, this database is not really as busy. So if we created a single database, which tier would this be in? So let's go look at our table here. We saw it go up to 90 DTUs, right? So looking at this, we can say, let's assign a standard S3 on this database because we know it goes up to 90 DTUs. But this is the problem though. Looking at this graph, you can see most of the time it did not go up to 90. You have to put it on a S3, which is actually 100, because you're saying that, yeah, it might have a spike, so I need that, right? I mean, if it's, let's say you did not have it up to S3, you had something like 50 over here, this point over here would actually not work. Sorry, jumped really quick. This point would actually not work. And the reason it would not work is because you don't have that kind of DTUs. And you are also putting an S3, so you are actually losing a little bit of, you know, money in there because your S3 will cost you obviously differently than any other performance level. Each performance level is built differently. There's a different amount on there. So sure, you can put it S3, but it's going to cost you a little bit and there's going to be a waste. So let's look at another scenario over here where we have four databases all over here, okay? So with four databases, the thing, and my slide is moving over here a little bit, just give me a second. So with four databases, what you can see over here is that they're all still hitting up to 90, but they're all doing that at a different time. So technically, you could take these four databases and put each database, separately an S3 performance level tier, or you can tell them I can put them all in a bucket and just put one S3 tier on them. And the way this would work is that they all will be requiring at least close to 100 DTUs, but not at the same time. So they can share that. Okay. Now, this is the thing though. Sure, they're going to be S3. And what happens if they're all doing this at the same time? Will this work? So looking at this table, this one goes up to 100. You can obviously have multiple databases over here, but in this scenario, it would probably not work because, you know, single database would go up to 100, multiple databases 100. You have to make them work separately. If you want them to all hit 100 at the same time, or there will be a possibility, you need to at least go for a premium P4 500 where they all can go there at the same time because at any given time that will be the DTU requirement, or at least during the peak. So over here, the table for the eDTUs is kind of similar because it has the same tiers, but you can see eDTUs per pool. So in our scenario, if we say that this database is not going to hit 90 all at the same time, we can put them all in the same pool and put basic tier with 100 as the DTU. Now, if you come back and say, all right, Sean, but there are times all four databases might require that, then we'll say that, hey, you probably need something up to 400. It will still be same tier, but we are going to increase the performance level to 400 DTUs because those databases might go up there at any given time concurrently. So if they are not going to do this concurrently, you can stay at 100. And if they do concurrently, you can go up to 400 or 800 or even more based on what the requirements are, right? Because eDTUs or DTUs are not the only thing that changes here. Like see, basic also had 100 and standard also has 100. But look at other resources like the database size, they change quite a bit. A lot of other things changes, but you can get away with that. And the price is considerably cheaper. So rather than these four databases all having like one one at a time, like having an S3, they can just be on a basic pool and or a standard pool and still be cheaper. And I'm going to get the calculator out for the Azure pricing calculator to show you. In fact, one last example over here, you could get away with DTU utilization with a single pool, even with 20 databases based on this scenario. If you look at this graph, none of them are actually hitting the 100 utilization all at a different time. This is 20 databases all at different times reaching that same eDTU or the DTU utilization. So I think it's a pretty good example of how you can use a single pool to host multiple databases and share the resources. End of the day, this is for just making it cost effective. If you have all the resources and saving cost is not really an issue, you can have a single database sitting at premium idle at night where you don't care. That's fine. But this is for people who want to make the most out of the elasticity when it comes to Azure, okay? And I'm going to pull up the calculator and show you a little bit of a calculation here. Just give me a moment. So this is the URL for the pricing calculator, azure.microsoft.com. It's English US pricing calculator. So in here, what we are going to do is basically look at the pricing for SQL databases, okay? And the way I did that over here was that let's actually hit enter over here to show you how this is done. When you load this page, I just went to like the most popular one and went to SQL databases. You can actually view estimates for many other things over here. This is how you really calculate, how much your things are going to cost. So over here, I'm in East US. Let's put at single database. I'm not going to look at the Elastic, okay? These are the two options, single database. And let's say I'm going to have a standard tier. And we know that a standard tier has multiple performance level, right? So these are all the different performance level for standard tier S3. So let's say I'm going to use S3 or 100 DTUs, okay? In 100 DTUs for one database, 744 hours, so which basically, it's pretty much considering the entire month here. So it's going to cost one database, if you do go in the single database way, in S3, $150 per month. Okay, change your, I mean, obviously I'm using US dollars here. You can change to wherever you are. If I have two databases, it's going to almost cost me double, like 300 per month. So that is two S3 databases with 100 DTUs. Let's say I'm going to have one database or one database, but I'm not going to go into the single database way, right? I'm going to use the Elastic database. In Elastic database, again, it's going to be standard, and I'm going to use Elastic 100 DTUs. You'll notice for Elastic database, for one database, it actually costs more, okay? It's not $150, it's $200. So it probably does not make sense for you to take one database and go to a Elastic pool because it's going to cost you more. But look at this. When I have like two databases over here, if I have two databases, I'm going to come over here. Actually, no, that's fine. If I have two databases, it's going to cost me only $223. Okay. If you recall the calculation over here, when it was single database and there was two databases, it was costing me $300. But if it's Elastic database and I take this one, and this is a pool, do not change that, okay? This is just one pool. We are going to put two databases in single pool. It's going to cost me $223 only. So as soon as I'm sharing the 100 DTUs, the price actually becomes lower. If I actually make three, it will be more lower per database. The only catch is these databases cannot all require the same resources all at the same time, because then 100 DTU is not going to be good. We'll have to, let's say, get 200 DTU. Then the price will actually go up. So two things I want to give you finally over here from this discussion. One is you need to determine if your database will be single database or Elastic. You need to determine how much your DTU requirement is per database. You need to determine that, if your databases will require you to be, I mean, they can share, right? I mean, they are not going to be all requiring the same DTUs or same resources at any given time together simultaneously, because that's not going to work. So that was one. The second thing, you have to look at the pricing. So when it's a single database with one database, it costs you $150. But look, as soon as you make it elastic, one pool, one database over here, it actually costs you more. So this is not just the only catch you have with one database over here. You might notice there are more combinations or more math that goes behind, where you will find that there may be a time when having a single database, it's probably more cost effective than having them in a pool. So these are the complex calculations, or these are the complex um, thought processes that you need to have before jumping into putting them in a single or putting them in a duplicate or a container as a pool with all the databases in there. So this is a little complex, like I mentioned. For me to get my head around this took a little bit of time when I was learning this, and things actually have become much simpler. With the pool, it was in preview for a while, so organizations are finding it much easier with this ones. Um, my rule of thumb, if you want to ask my personal experience from the field, is that go with a single database first, because you already have one thing you have to worry about, which is that how much DTU it is. So once you have figured out how many DTUs it really requires, and you have multiple databases, and you figured out all the DTUs they require, the portal actually shows you very nice graphs and analytics with advisories, like what you need to do in there. So you can then take those different usage patterns and then determine if you can put them in a pool or not. So some people are very confident and really good at this math, really good at figuring out the usage. They go with the pool right away. Say that, hey, I need 3 databases. I know what the usage is going to be. I'm going to put them together. I'm going to assign a EDTU to them, and we are good to go. For me, I like taking one database, making it a standard database, and taking it from there, calculating everything, and then eventually putting them in different, not even one pool. Like you could have multiple pools. You might have a pool with 100 as DTU. We have another pool with 200 basic tiers. Then you have another pool with premium, databases in there. So you can have multiple pools as well. It just all comes down to knowing the usage and how much it's going to cost you. Okay, so I hope this was really nice and simple for you. I tried to explain this as well as I could. Repeat the videos if you need to simplify, but I thought those were the most simplest ways to explain this. All right. So let's go to our demo right now, where I'm actually going to create a database, and we are going to go to the portal to do this. So let's go to my client computer here. So in this demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have everything done in I'm going to have everything done in the portal and not use PowerShell. I'm going to leave that for a different session. But let's get started. So I do not, in my resource group, I have nothing over here. So the first thing you need to do, obviously have a subscription. The first thing you need to do is create a SQL server. And this is not like a typical SQL server. I have this over here. If you don't have it, and by the way, actually, let's explain this. I explained this before, but someone emailed me anyways. So the reason I see things over here differently than yours is because that's how I customized and put them there. The way you would see, I mean, these are the ones I'm using most commonly. And in this session, I was going to use a bunch of SQL stuff. So I went and put them over here. In a different session, I might have something else. The way you put things over here is by going to browse. You go to browse. These are all the things that are available to you. Okay, so let's say I wanted to know something about all my virtual machines out. Well, I already have that, so that's why you can see the gold star here. Let's say I want to have something like, let's go up here. I want to see everything with my, actually I have everything I really wanted over there. I want to see everything with my, let's see over here, all my virtual networks, all my subscriptions. Yeah, let's see that. So I want to see how my subscriptions are. So I'll come down over here, go on my subscriptions. I actually have my subscription already over here as well. Uh, Anyways, you get the idea. You need anything from here you don't see on your one, put a gold star on there, it will show up over here. Okay, let's say search services. I'll do one. As soon as you do that, you can see the search services showed up over here. If you want to remove them, you take them out from there as well. Okay, so I went and put the ones that are more relevant to the sessions we have, like having virtual machines, virtual networks, storage. It's important for me, SQL servers. So, or you can go to new over here and search for something as well if you don't find it. Like you could go over here and do a SQL server and come with all the SQL server things that you need from there as well. So anyways, let's first go and create a SQL server. This SQL server is not like a mystical, magical VM that's being created behind. No, this is more like a container. Like you have multiple databases that can sit on a SQL server, right? So this is, think of it as more of a container than a server itself. So before you create a database, you want to have a SQL server. So the way you do that is coming to SQL servers, go to add, and it's going to ask you for information here. This SQL server actually has to be like it has to have a unique name because it will be SQL Server.database.windows.net. This is how you will be connecting to your database from your application or from your management studio. I'll get that on next session, but this is how you'll be. So let's call mine Ranger SQL SRV. Okay. The reason I put Ranger before, and actually somebody emailed me about that as well. The reason I put Ranger before all these names rather than just a SQL Server, obviously one, to make this unique. And the second thing is the way I work is that if I put a custom name like Ranger before everything, when I have all the resources, I know that that's something I have created rather than someone creating that for me from the system. Okay. So my server is going to, and it's available over here. It's called Ranger SQL SRV. I'm going to put a username and password for this server, which I'll be needing for creating my database. It's actually going to look for the password twice. Okay, this is my subscription. I do not have a resource group, so I'm going to go create a new resource group. I'll call it Ranger SQL Resource Group. Okay, be creative with yours. And it's going to ask for a location. My location is East US 2. And with this one, I'm going to give this checkbox. I'll explain that in a bit once this server is created, what it means. Allow Azure services to access server. Okay, let's go create. This actually does not take too long. This server will be done really, really shortly over here. So just refresh. I mean, it's not really creating a virtual machine or anything at the back end. So it should be done relatively soon. Okay, so the deployment must have succeeded by now. All right, so I have a server already. Let's go in there, see what's available in there. You'll see that surprisingly, not a whole lot. One, it says there's no databases on this server. Two, if I go to properties here, it'll show me like the server name, it's showing the server login, you know, it's not on Active Directory or anything like that, nothing in there. So this is the thing I wanted to show you, the firewall. By default, whichever computer I used to get to the browser, it went and added me to the firewall. So, I mean, it did not add me to the firewall, but it's telling me that where I'm connecting from. So this is technically my IP address. But if you look at the firewall rules configured, it's not there, okay? Allow access to Azure services, which we did as a checkbox, was because we want this portal to have access to the database, which we do. So if we create the database, any database right now, it actually will be able to create it on this server because we kept this one as on. So we know that this portal is allowed. The reason they are actually displaying this over here is because that's probably the first thing you want to do, right? I mean, you want to get on a database, Database Explorer or something, or your application from your computer to do this. In production environment, you are going to probably have like everybody open to this one if you wanted them if you wanted them to get to your database. But that's probably not going to be the case. In production, you probably will have a web app or an application running on a server which has its own IP address, public address. You should only allow that, not everybody, okay? So because this is available to the public, we just saw that there was a public DNS entry to get to this database. As a security precaution, you want to make sure that you only allow the servers or the clients that you want to connect. That's why by default there are nobody allowed to this database. Okay. I'll show you the details of or the implications of this in the next session. But in here, conveniently, it gave me my computer from where I'm running this browser to put it in here. Okay, if I really wanted to do that, I would have done that. Right now, I'm going to leave this alone. In this database, there's also other things like, auditing, like who's connecting, who's not connecting. Those things you can turn on and off over here. But what I really want to show you over here is that there's not a whole lot that you can do over here at this point. Okay. All right. Let's close this all over here. So that's my server. Now let's get to actually creating a database. The way you do that is after you created the server, go to SQL Databases. In SQL Databases, there's no database over here. So let's go ahead and click on Add. In Add, I'm going to create a database and it's going to look for a database name. I'm going to call it my DB1. Okay, this is my database one. It's asking that do you have a resource group? Yeah, well, this is the resource group. It's asking select source. So what it means by that is that do you want this to be a blank database, or Microsoft gives you like a sample database? Like, do you want a sample? And this is the adventure works. So if you guys already worked with creating databases on premises, you know that you can download a sample database to work with. Or you can do this from a backup, like, get a backup from somewhere else and get this backup over here and restore it on this database. So I'm going to say, let's go ahead and create a sample database where, it's still a database, but Adventure Works, it's a pre-populated database that Microsoft provides you over there. It's looking for the server admin login. So right now it's looking for the servers. We have only one server, so it went and picked on that. It's called Ranger SQL Server, the one that we created over here. And if you remember, when we created it, it was looking for some credentials. Those are the credentials you need. So if you have multiple servers created, or even one server like I do, you have to have the credentials to create a database on that server. Okay. Now comes the tier. If you recall that when we were creating the database, I mentioned that you also have to give it a tier. So what tier do you want? So these are all the tiers, that table. We had basic, we had standard, and we had premium. And premium and standard actually had different, you know, performance levels. So I'm going to go with something very small. Okay, I'm going to go with the S0 100 DTUs. My database can go up to 250 gigs. So for an example, I'll just go do that. Okay, so that's all I need. So I'm going to hit on create. It's going to take a little bit of time to create this. I think it takes a couple of minutes. So I'm going to pause the video and come back once it's created. All right, so it took about a couple of minutes, but it went and created my database. So look at here. So it's my database. And once you go over here, you can see activity logs. You can actually see performance. So this is a good thing. You can see how much DTUs or stuff your database is requesting. So you can see over here. I just created right now, so there's not a whole lot going on here. This is the thing I like a lot. It's recommendations. So after a while, when Microsoft Azure analyzes your database a little bit, it can start giving recommendations that what performance tier you need to be and things like that. Go to properties, it actually shows the properties is 10 DTUs only, max size of database 250. And just like that, we actually have a database created right now. Okay, so this is a database over here. So what we can do is create another database. So like I said, you can create as many databases as you want. This is my database 2. I'm going to make this a blank database maybe. It's going to be a Ranger SQL Server. So this is going to be on the same server because that's the only server we have. I don't know. Let's see, the pricing will make it a little different. Last one we made S0. This one will keep S3. Yeah, sure. And over here, we'll do a create. Let's see, it's actually creating another database. Okay, so this one is a standard S0. There'll be another one, standard S3. So a couple of things. One, we can create as many as we want. And the second thing is, how do you actually connect to this database? We know that there's a sample database in there, right? But how do you connect to that? So one way is to actually use the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. This is a free download you can now get online. Before it was not free, but it's something you can get free right now. So just go Bing or Google for it, SQL Server 2016 Management Studio, and you should get it. Okay. So what I'm going to do over here is, how do you connect to this database? The way you connect to this database is through your SQL Server. And if you remember, in the SQL Server, when we went to the when we are creating it, or when you go to the properties, it actually shows you the SQL Server name, Ranger SQL Serve database.windows.net. So you want to take this, copy this over here. When you have downloaded Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, this is the first thing that will come up. So the server name you want is paste it over here. The reason Sean is over here is because I tried connecting to something else before this session, but then it's going to look for your login and your password. This is the same login and the password we put in there when we created this one, okay? So I want to show you something over here. I'm going to go and put in the password, and I'm not going to click on connect. So this is the server. I'm going to connect to the server, and it's going to show me all the databases that this server has, okay? So right now, how many databases are there? Probably just, well, both of them actually got created. My standard S0 and my second one, which is the empty database, which is standard S3. So this is also an example of different pricing tiers, okay? Because maybe this database has more requirements than this one. But anyways, when I connect to the database server, I should see these two databases. But one more thing, can I connect from my computer? So this is running on my computer, connect to this database server. Chances are no. And the reason behind that is, if you remember, when your database server is first created, the firewall does not allow anybody to connect, okay? So in this firewall, there is nobody over here, no firewall rules configured, okay? So if I try to connect on this, it will actually give me an error. It's actually giving me an error that your client IP address does not have access to the server. So not only it's giving me an error, it's actually telling me that if you want to sign in and add your server, which is your client IP, which it also determines, so this is the same as this one, right? You can add it over there, then it will allow you. So one way to do that is right from here, where you can go and add those IP addresses, or if you remember, conveniently, it actually showed my client IP address over here. I could have taken this over here, put my name or what my computer's name, and put my start and end IP as the same IP address and configured that. But I'll do it from here, okay? So it's basically just looking for your Azure credentials. So I'm going to do it from here. Personal account. Obviously, in a production environment, you probably do not want to go to every computer that needs access to the management console or database manually. So you probably go and do that from there. So it's actually asking, do you want a range or do you want to add my client IP? It might be a range if you want, certain applications in a certain range on your servers to do that. I'm going to just use individually my IP address. So it's in progress. It went and added that, and it got connected to from my on-premises client over here, Management Studio, to the one in Azure. And if we come over here, let's close this, we should be able to see this added right now. So it went and gave a random name, and it went and added my IP address over here. Like I said, I could have added it manually, but I kind of made this client do that. So if I go and look at databases right now, I should see two databases. These are the two databases I have. My first database should actually have tables, because this is like a, you know, like this is some sort of a example database that Microsoft created. So if I go and select top 1000 rows, it will actually go now make that query and show me all this information. It takes a little bit time, but it will go and do that, right? So look at this. It actually has some data. So Microsoft gives you that database for free to actually play with. And my second database I knew was empty, so technically it should not have any tables in there. Okay, so there's no tables in there, which is fine. So there are some tasks that I can do from the Management Studio to take care of this. What I was trying to get at over here now is that there are two, in this server, there are two databases over here as well. Okay, so come to the databases here. So if you have an application that's written, you have to have a connection string. You want to make sure it's on the server firewall. You probably want a couple of admins in your organization where you can, have them, or you can allow their client computers access to this database to do some management. So there is some security tasks you can do over here. Like I only have one login. You can actually create multiple logins, right? I mean, it actually tells you how to create another login where it will go to the server and, for your application connection string, you can actually create a login here as well. So certain tasks, and we'll go over these details in some future session. Um, Now, the pool. Okay, so all the databases that we created so far were individual databases, right? Let's say now I found out this one was S0, this one was S3. I was like, hey, the maximum I'm going to go is S3, but this second database does not require S3 capabilities all at a given time. So maybe this guy does not have so many requirements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one pool right now, and I'm going to put both of them together. So if you remember our pricing calculator, right now to host these two databases, let me see where my pricing calculator is. So I have a single database with a standard S0 with one database. It's going to cost me about $15 a month. And I have another one, which is S3 over here. So I'm going to go do that. Standard S3. So it's going to be $150 per month. So right now I'm paying about 150 plus 15. So what is that? 165? $165 per month. But then I have to have both of them up. I'm using $165. And I know that both of my databases are not super active all the time. So what I want to do is go back here and say, I'm going to put this in a pool. And the way I do that is create a SQL Elastic pool over here. Once again, if you don't have this tab, go to browse and get that. I'm going to create a pool. And in the pool, I'm going to name it. I'm going to call it Ranger DB pool, database pool. It's going to be similar to what I have. It's going to be the server and same server and everything else. And I lost it. Come here. Go to add. I'm going to call Ranger DB pool. Sorry about that. And it's going to be the same server. Look, it's actually looking for a pricing tier again. So I'm going to say that, you know what? I'm going to go up to 100 to 1200 EDTUs, right? It's similar. So I'm going to say I'm going to take a standard pool. But in a standard pool, now I need to go to the configure the pool. Here, it will give you more options. So right now, my EDTU is 100. Given on how my SQL database requirements were, S3, I can leave it at that. In Elastic Pool, you can go, however, a little bit more because you are saying that, 100 DTU probably might not work. What if, like, both of them work at the same time? I'll need more DTUs than that. So in my pricing calculator, I believe S0 is 10. So, I need 110 DTUs, but I don't have that over here if both of them go up at the same time. So I can say, like you can see over here, my EDTU max is 100, but my EDTU minimum is 0, 0 to 100. But I can't go more. So you can actually get this dial and say, you know what, go up to 200 DTUs. So what that will do is if concurrently these databases are going, you got more DTU, or if you don't, you want to save money because you know none of them will go more than 100, you can do that as well. Okay, so my monthly cost over here, you can see, is going to be 273, which is kind of similar if I come over here and go Elastic Database, and if I was going to 100 DTUs, 223, there's a little discrepancy over here, but based on whatever their calculation was 0 to 100, they found out it's going to be 273. Actually, I know where the discrepancy is because my portal is in Canadian dollars because I'm in Canada, is doing the calculation over here, however, in US dollar. So let's actually change that to Canadian dollar. So 271, pretty close with everything else. It's going to cost me around there. Okay, so you can do that calculation over here. So let's do select. So I'm going to say that it's still going to be that many configure pool. Let me see which databases. I did not select any databases, so I can come over here. There are currently no databases selected in the pool. So yeah, let's leave it like that. Let's try to create it. I would create the pool, and once you create the pool, you can assign the databases to go in the pool. So just like that, I saved about $15 a month, given that I'm going to only use up to S3 performance level of the standard tier, and both my databases can share the resources. Okay, so that's how the Elastic Pool sort of works. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of calculation you have to put in the back end when this is going to be done, but for now, That's how just you create it. In the later sections, we'll go into more details on monitoring it. We'll go into more details on how to connect to this all separate databases, performance, connect to these databases and perform tasks on them and things like that. But this is just a basic scenario of how to create this. So let me refresh that. Still creating the pool. All right, so the pool got created over here. Let's go jump into the pool. And over here, you can see there's no data available. Nothing is going on over here. It just got created. So what we are going to do is either you can create databases directly to the pool, or you can configure pool over here, or from here, anywhere. Go to configure pool, and you can add to the pool. Okay, so this pool will go up to 100. So add to the pool. These are the two databases we have created. So we can take both of these databases, select them, and say that these are going to go inside this pool. Okay, so save that. So now it's taking those single databases and putting them in this pool. Takes a little bit of time. So it's adding them right now. Alrighty, so it got added over here, minimum 0, maximum 100. Just like that, we put them in the pool and we saved about 15 bucks a month, right? So, well, now you can realize that if you have multiple databases, they will actually, uh, they will probably, you can probably save some money doing this quite a bit actually. So if we go to the SQL databases over here, you can see that the pricing tier now changed to Elastic Standard. Okay, so before it was showing S0, S3, right now it's like Elastic Standard. Okay, that's how we put it in there. So if you leave them up and running a little bit, if you run some queries, you'll eventually find out that it started showing some metrics over here. So right now we do not have any graphs, not really anything that will help you figure out what's the performance over here. But overall, before ending the session, I just want to show you not show you, I want to make you appreciate how you just created a database so fast in the portal. That's what, leaving all the concepts and complexities aside, the ease of creating a database. If you were an app developer, rather than having your sysadmin go create a server, put everything on there, give you a development environment, you just pretty much have access to a database just like that, where you can have your connection string connect to this database and start putting data right now for whatever prototyping you're doing, what you're doing. And you know what? By default, all of these things are sort of being backed up. It has already all the availability and you don't have to worry about DR. So if this was production environment, a little more, and you can actually have a very resilient environment taken care of for you. You don't have to worry about this database server. You don't have to worry about the databases performance. It even gives you advisory on how to fix your performances. Okay, so I want you to appreciate the platform as a service and the SQL Server offering from Azure because of that. Okay, so I guess that sort of concludes our session. In this session, so we looked at what Azure SQL, uh, you know, offering is from a platform as a service point of view. What are, the really two ways to do this is as an infrastructure as a service, where you create a VM and put SQL Server on there, or, platform as a service, what we saw in the demo to create doing this. We went and saw different pricing tiers or performance tiers where you can, put different resources on your databases depending on your application workload or the kind of power you need on there. We talked about DTUs, the database transaction units or data transaction units. What you can do is, you know, calculate the DTUs to calculate what kind of performance your database needs. We talked about how to create a standard database or create a pool and put databases in there to overall save and make it cost effective, or, make the performance more elastic or auto scaling. And we saw in this session how to, make a SQL server and then create a database and add it to the server. In the demo also, we created a pool and added database on the pool. So quite a bit. And this was just part one introduction. I'm going to get into details in the next section as well, just to get you started. So let's leave this session over here for now. I wanted to go a little bit more, but I think we are on top of the hour right now. So let's conclude here, guys. That's my training site. YouTube, that's where you're viewing this right now. The slides are going to be posted over there. Twitter is @Sean Ismail. You can email me if you want to connect on LinkedIn. That's where you go. Do not forget to like the videos, guys, and thank you for viewing, and I'll see you in the next